All right. So I
All
think
right.
I'm recording. So
Yep, my end is up as well. So welcome back, Dr. Frog. It's good to see you again. We have so many things that we can talk about. I know McCain is on the list and Q is on the list. Where do you want to start, brother?
I watched much of the funeral today of McCain. There are probably people who would say, "How could you possibly do that after all the nasty things you said about him?" But I wanted to hear what everybody else had to say. And of course, it was a major theatrical event. It's I don't know what the cathedral is, whether it's the major cathedral in DC, it must be, but I mean, the place must be 400 feet high in the inside. It's gorgeous. And of course, it was all very formal, and we had three presidents there, plus everybody else that matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love how Michelle Obama got kind of caught smirking and shaking her head back and forth. And the really most interesting thing was that even after they bashed him and all of this stuff, it later came out apparently that Trump loaned them a plane to get the casket to DC. So I thought that was
Oh,
cool.
is that right?
Yeah, I just found that out a minute ago from TMZ.com.
Yeah.
So
Well, as I understand it, McCain wrote his own funeral plans, including the being held in state. I think that's a little presumptive, perhaps, but and that he specifically requested that Trump not attend.
mhm. Yeah, to me, it seemed like one giant Democrat political rally.
Well, you had the crossover guys. You had the what's his name from Connecticut,
The
Big
rhinos.
Mouth, and yeah, and Lindsey Graham, who I vacillate on, and uh, and then of course the presidents. And I think in fairness, the presidents did a really good job. The two ex-presidents, Bush did as good as you could possibly expect from him. Obama was witty, got a great laugh out of him. I mean, one of the thing that he said that was really funny was that McCain got them in the end because his two major opponents, Obama and Little George E. Shrubby Bush, I see my internet connection is unstable again. Um, his two major opponents to become president ended up having to give accolades about him at his funeral. What more could you ask?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. If indeed he is dead, many people still think that he's in Gitmo now. So I don't even know what to think about that, but he won't be too far along, I guess, with his age and the fact that he would probably be. My theory on this is if he's faking his death, he probably would then be open game for the good guys to take out. So either way, he's probably not long for this world if he's still alive.
Um, it's really hard to tell. I made some kind of comment that he was allegedly dead, and I had people that agreed,
Hmm.
as you kind of have, and I had people that basically said they thought I was the biggest idiot that was on YouTube because
Yeah,
obviously, how could you imagine a guy with glioblastoma? They typically live a year. He hasn't been in the Senate for what, 6 or 8 months.
yeah,
He hasn't been outside, and so he's obviously dead, right? Well, um, for those of us who have gone down the rabbit hole, we've seen some pretty strange rabbits,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Well, they said Hitler was dead for a long time too, but then it came out that he actually escaped and lived his days out. So this is something that has historical precedence. It's not unheard of.
oh yeah, I think that we have witness protection programs that we actively use. Now it's a little hard to do a witness protection program with a guy who's got a funny looking jaw and a big scar down the side of his face. But and maybe I shouldn't be that disrespectful. I don't know, but yeah, you couldn't hide him in Thailand. You couldn't hide him in Argentina or anywhere else.
I had heard some people, and I'm not an expert on surgery at all, but I had heard some people say that kind of cancer you're supposed to go in from the back, not over the eyebrows. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe it's worth looking into. Maybe people who know could chime in. But there was a lot of things about it. Like he didn't really lose a lot of his mass from the chemo. He didn't really lose a lot of his hair from the chemo. There was that whole situation where he had that boot on one leg that then switched to the other leg. There was that. So even among McCain's history, there's a lot of deception and such in his own personal history. And what gets me is the people that are trying to defend him, trying to say he's like a good guy, or it's a shameful thing to mention all of his crimes. He's basically a war monger. He's a war criminal.
Yeah, I think I had people, lots of them. Of course, when you put 3 videos up on one guy, the week he died, then you take flack.
Yeah,
and I took flack, and there were people. It was really interesting because there were people that said I was too nice about him. You get this stuff. You know what I'm talking about. There were people that said, "Oh, gee, why are you so nice to him?" Or you didn't mention that he did X, Y, and Z. You didn't make a big deal out of the fact that he was seen with all the ISIS mucky mucks, that with the Ukraine mobsters, that he was hanging around with Oleg Deripaska, that he has closer connections to Russia than just about anybody except perhaps Hillary. Why didn't you mention all this stuff? You obviously are an idiot. You don't know what you're doing.
The list just goes on and on. I mean,
yeah, and that's what I had somebody that, excuse me for interrupting, Dustin, but I had somebody that wrote and said, well, I don't know how you could come up with this and you haven't verified it. You haven't put a lot of facts in. And I said, I wrote back in my comment and said, look him up. There are only about 50 things you could look up that would any one of which would cause you to question his veracity as a hero and a great American. Any one of them.
Yeah. For those who were in the armed services, I'll remind them that he was responsible for over 130 deaths, but he got out of it because Dad and Grandpa were admirals. It was the wet start incident. But so McCain is for better or worse, dead or alive, in prison or dead of cancer, whatever. He's now off the field. He's no longer an important piece, and now they're just trying to use him to score some cheap political points, which seems to be, in my opinion, backfiring on them badly. It's making them look so desperate and immoral and just immature.
I listened on MSNBC, and I can't remember what the guy's name that has the fuzzy little goatee like mine. I used to watch him 100 years ago, and I haven't watched him in at least 10 years. And he made comments like, well, here we are with 3 past presidents all here, and the seated president, the current president in office, is out golfing today. And I thought, that's a cheap shot you didn't need to make. He didn't get an invitation. What is he supposed to do? Go sit in a closet and mourn for an hour? Or 3 hours? What's he supposed to do?
Yeah, he's barred for one, and then this is the guy whose name we don't say. This is no name McCain. I mean, if you follow the Q stuff, then you know all about why Trump would probably be in a good mood, if anything. But I'd love to talk about those new Q posts too, because he's dropped some heavy stuff lately. I know you follow it as well.
So let's take a look at a couple of them. I'm all for it. I put up a video on the last day or so, and not to make a big deal about it, but I see I've got an internet unstable thing again, so maybe you're not getting me.
The video, the sound is good. So
I went through the FISA stuff and talked about what a Fourth Amendment right of privacy includes and why it has to have a warrant. And then I went through the FISA stuff and so showed how they basically violated everything that has to do with the constitutional mandate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a rubber stamp.
All right.
We gave them power, and then they abused it.
Yeah, it not only was it a rubber stamp, but they didn't even have a hearing on the Carter Page stuff. They didn't even have a hearing. They did it. They basically filed the stuff, and the judge rubber stamped it without even having a hearing. And secondly, this should be a court of record, right? This should be a court where they keep a transcript and they record everything and they follow through on it, and they make note of what they asked, what questions they asked, what problems they had, what concerns they had, and they went ahead and ruled on it and allowed for, and in the process allowed for the feds to respond to the questions. And if that didn't raise questions, I mean, it should be recorded always. There should be questions always. This is a severe violation of anybody's rights. But when you have a candidate, one of the two major party candidates for president, and you're seeking to investigate him with the 702 FISA warrant, which basically throws an umbrella over 10,000 people involved in his campaign, and you don't even have a hearing on it, it's pretty crazy stuff.
I heard that a theory floated. This is just a non-floating theory, but it was maybe that Loretta Lynch, as AG, used her powers. She has some sort of U.S. code power for a 7-day emergency without a FISA hearing to get a FISA warrant. And within 7 days, she has to go back and then justify it or something like that. But that was one theory that seemed plausible to me. I did a breakdown on it recently, but I can't remember all the details. And then, there's all of the FISA stuff, of course. But, at the same point, Q has basically promised us death or suffering among the highest level of the bad guys within the year. I mean, that's a 90-day window. That's a big promise. And then on top of that, he just silenced and muted them and blinded them. So he took out their, the satellites and supercomputers. They're now blinded. Now they're meeting in secret, like we had talked about before the show.
That's I did not look into the whole, what is it, Columbia, the what are these other things that
the different code names
that he went through and said, this is down, this is down, this is down, this is down. And that's the way you read it?
It is. And in fact, there's an article out by, I don't even know if people have seen this yet. I was going to do it in my news tonight, but Principia-scientific.org, they just mentioned that the U.S. military has suddenly blocked the UK from all spy satellite access. So it's like, maybe this really happened. And they're even talking about the Q thing. They're calling it a conspiracy theory, but they're showing how Q had kind of called it. Maybe there's something to it. And if that's the case, it would stand to reason that something big is about to happen. If he is now choosing this moment.
Are you there?
Oh yeah. Can you hear me?
It's locked up, I think.
Oh no. We may have to just turn the video off and do audio, because that would probably be better anyway. It would probably cut down the signal. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, no, I think it would entirely.
Okay, what
do we do?
Just hit the video camera icon and hit that off. Down left.
All right.
There we go. That's probably better.
All right. Yeah, it's clean.
It stands to reason that if strategically, if he is silencing the bad guys and blinding them right now, he's doing it before something big. You don't just take out their communications. You do that before you move. And on top of that, tonight he put out something about basically preparedness. The message I got was, be prepared, have storable food, be ready, have a plan. So I feel like something's about to drop, something big.
Yeah, no, I feel exactly as you did, and that's exactly the message I got when I got this September's preparedness month or something There is I have had a sense for a very long time that if we're going to have a big shakeup,
right here, midterms.
Everybody is looking for what's the shoe that's going to drop, what kind of October surprise are we going to have, and who's going to do it. And the other thing, I listened to Robert David Steele. It said basically that the Rothschilds were out of the banking thing and he had that all cared for. And I thought, I don't mean to be picking on him, but if I was worth 20 or 50 trillion dollars and somebody was going to shut down my business, I think I would probably be not just go quietly away. And so where's the shakedown? And there are 100 of those. There are 100 of those that could come in and say, no, we're not going to go for. You're not going to take us down without a fight. I can't imagine them not.
Yeah, these people are not used to being challenged or being stopped. This is this little upstart guy from New York who thinks that he's going to challenge this system that goes back decades, if not millennia. It's amazing to me still that he's alive at this point and hasn't been killed. And I don't know how it's happening, but they must be really good at keeping people alive. The good guys. I don't know. But, we've got all of these big signals from Q right at the midterms, right as, we both knew this was going to happen around midterms because they're trying to vie for position and their last hope is to impeach him. That's the only thing they have. So they have to win. They have to bring out whatever they have now. And so far, I'm just not impressed. So far, they have nothing on the left.
Well, and the flip side of it is that when you look at it from the Trump side of it, is he has to win because he's the new sheriff in town in D.C. And if we want to put this in the OK Corral kind of thing or Dodge City, he's walking down the street and there are snipers in the old saloons and the taverns and on the third floor and on top of the roof, trying to shoot at him from every direction. And right now, at least, with the military on his side and with the majority in Congress, it's cut that in half. But if you take the House of Representatives out, all the storefronts are going to have guns sticking out of them too, to play with the metaphor clear to the end, because his store, his place of doing business is all the storefronts, and they're all going to be Democrat if he loses.
Yeah. I will say this in criticism, if it were me and I were Trump and I admire his bravery, I would not be getting out of the car. I would not be, on the stage without some sort of like bulletproof protecting. Like I would be like the Pope. I would drive around with like a 6-inch bulletproof armor around me at all times, because what happens if they take him out? It's not going to go well. It's going to start a revolution for sure.
No, there's no question that there are 10 million people who have some sense that Trump is on the right track, who, if he were taken out and you put Mike Pence in his place, we would be at the pitchfork stage.
So I agree.
I absolutely agree with you. But, here's, I don't know whether you've been to one of those, but I took my grandson to the Trump rally in Phoenix when he was a candidate. And we did metal screening. They made us check all of the signs and posters and the rest of that. You couldn't take a briefcase or a bag or anything else in. And there were guys walking through the crowd that were not paying attention to anything. And they were big dudes, man. I'm a fairly good sized guy. And when they stood alongside of me, it was like, oh my God. They were 6'3" and 240, and you could see the ripples on their muscles. There was no messing around. And I think he probably does have bulletproof screens and the rest of that for some of those rallies, don't you?
Yeah, maybe so. There are so many ways, and there are people out there on the bad team that are way smarter than me at this. But there are so many ways I could think of to get around that kind of security without it would bypass metal. Recently down in Venezuela, we saw somebody fly an explosive on a drone and crash it. This may have been a publicity stunt, but crash it near the leader while he was on stage giving a speech. I mean, they're getting more creative. They're getting more desperate. And the big bad guys, the ones that are really heading the cabal, I mean, you've seen all these movies in Hollywood about these doomsday scenarios, and one example being it's a movie called Spawn. It's like a not super villain. It's like a superhero, but he's kind of like a bad guy superhero, like an anti-hero sort of type, based on a comic hero. But the bad guy in this movie has this device put in his heart. If he's ever killed, the world dies through this bioweapon. I mean, that's the kind of doomsday final solution that I would expect these bad guys to have put in place. And that's the kind of thing that worries me. Like, what do they have access to that we don't even know about? What are they willing to do rather than go down?
Well, we saw in the 70s, they had a gun that shot a needle that was so small it was hardly bigger than a pore. It penetrated the person, melted inside of the person, so it basically disappeared, and it was lethal. It caused them a heart attack or something like that.
Yeah.
And all it left was a tiny, tiny red needle mark, and even the best forensic guy would probably have missed it, and they would have to try to trace it, to cut through it. That was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I hear people talking about things like remote plasma stuff and having access to these kinds of things where they could basically multi-angle plot at you, like a CAT scan.
You can do it with a microwave. You can convert a microwave into an electro weapon. So imagine if they had a few of those guys out there, and those things could have, I don't know what kind of radius or range. They could go through the crowd, through the rallies, through the wall. They wouldn't even have to go in. So it's like I'm not a miracle kind of guy, but it's like a miracle. And I see no reason to think that it won't continue, but he's warning us to get ready and prepare and have storable food and stuff. So now is the crunch time, as I see it.
Yeah, we've been told, we've been warned, and of course this is classic deep state stuff, shadow government stuff. We've been warned for 2 or 3 years now that we could have our monetary system crash.
Yeah.
And all they would have to do is get on the screen and say, well, the derivatives all failed, the banks are failing across the country, the FDIC and the rest of that doesn't have 2% enough money. You guys are running on the banks. We're going to have to shut them all down. Your currency is dead. Nothing is going to work, and we'll get back with you. And you are going to have to be chipped and digitized in order to have any money at all. And they could basically do what they did in India 2 or 3 years ago. And it's a test run. They got rid of the big currencies and made everybody check them in, or they were worthless. They could do the same thing here and shut us all down, completely shut us down. They could shut down the oil supply lines. They could shut down the grocery distribution. They could shut down the electrical grid. They could shut down, and as well as I do, that anytime they do this, they're going to shut down the internet. That's the first thing that's going to go down.
Mm-hmm. Every one of these systems that we're relying on in our daily, survival, like the food supply system, they're all so fragile. You wouldn't even have to necessarily do that from on high. You would just have to mess a little bit with the chain, and it would fall apart on its own. So I don't know what's going to happen if they go that way.
If you've been at Safeway or one of the other outfits when their computer went down, they can't sell you a carrot.
Yeah, look at what happens when there are instances where the food stamps weren't working for 3 or 4 days, and then you get rioting, violence. I mean, Black Fridays, they trample people to death for things that they want to buy as gifts. I don't know what would happen if people were starving. I mean, I do know what would happen. It would be really bad anywhere near a major population center. But
you're going to have what I've seen, and I hate to sound so dark about it, but If you shut down the grocery supply in a major city, let's say Portland or Seattle or Denver or Phoenix, within 20, you have people that if they can't get it at Family Dollar, they're not getting it at all, and they run out of milk and eggs, and they had nothing in the shelf at home. Now they're hungry, and in 3 days you got Mad Max.
Yeah. Well, on the positive side, Trump did get all of that money from the omnibus thing, and that was pretty record setting, and maybe he's got the National Guard ready to go if that happens. But it is something we have to consider, because the warnings from Q, because everything is coming to a head, because of the midterms, because of the nature of the evil that we're dealing with. If they're willing to do all these other things with kids and everything else, then they're certainly willing to start wars and cause mass death to win.
If in fact Trump's a good guy, and I know there are people that get angry with me for even suggesting he isn't, if he's a good guy, then there's nothing they won't do to upset it. Nothing.
Yeah.
And that includes us in the process. And a majority of the people, maybe even that watch us, would say, well, I can't imagine anybody killing 5 million or 10 million or 20 million Americans. Who would do that? Well, if you've looked at it and you've spent years at it, as you and I have, you know that if they started World War I and there were 50 million people died, if they started the Bolshevik Revolution and 20 million people died, if they put on forgive me for even bringing it up because you get in trouble, if they set the Holocaust up to force the everyday Jewish person in Europe to flee to Israel, and that was part of their way of forcing them, and they didn't mind that 1 million or 2 of them died in the process. The record shows 276,000, but there's nothing they won't do. Nothing.
Yeah. I mean, they plan these things out anyway. Massive death for them is like these are the same people that write books about depopulation and everything else, and quotes from the royal prince saying in the UK about how he wants to be reincarnated as a lethal virus to wipe out the overpopulation problem, things like that. Jonas Salk, the father of modern vaccines and the Salk polio vaccine, talked about eugenics. Bill Gates, it goes on and on and on. These people believe that we're useless eaters. And
well, they put a monkey virus in the Salk vaccine. I think it was in one of the polio vaccines. There was a forensic biologist that did everything she could to stop them from distributing 75 million polio vaccines.
It was bad.
And apparently it's a DNA altering virus that goes from one generation to the next. So Ebola, where did it come from? Where did Zika come from? So your sense is that these Corona and Snow White and what else do we have here?
Yeah,
Big Bird. That those are all the satellite feeds.
I think he uses the word "eye in the sky" at one point, and that's a satellite terminology. Yeah, I think it is. I think he's blinded them. I think that's probably why they're having this emergency meeting. I think that, I feel like maybe they had some sort of backdoor access to the NSA as well, because there was, I'm not looking at it, but I feel like there was one of those comments as well in there. It was like an NSA thing, and then that was redirected and shut down as well. So maybe they had some sort of backdoor to that, which would give them a ton of useful information if they wanted it.
Well, it's hard to say that any of this stuff is not leaky like a sieve.
Yeah.
When you have people that what's our boy Edward Snowden, how many of them are double spies on both sides of our own agencies?
Yeah. How many good guys do you see getting Hollywood movie deals like Snowden got? I've been really dealing with this issue lately, the fake MAGA issue, ever since I was using that term, I think, before Q was. And then when I saw him use it and basically talk about healing the movement and exposing the fake magas and stuff, you know, I've been on a personal crusade to kind of call out the liars when I can. And I get a lot of pushback from that. I get a lot of people that are saying, you know, I'm creating disunity and everything else. But, you know, I didn't say this originally. I saw it somewhere else. But Q never told us to be in unity with liars. And he's basically tasked us to expose the fake news and then more recently the fake MAGAs. So I'm just doing my job here. But
well, and it goes exactly to the whole discussion about McCain. I had people that said, well, McCain's dead, leave it alone. And you write back and say, I don't think you get it. This is like finding the tail, the discarded scale of a giant dragon. And you say, well, toss that scale aside and leave it. You know, leave it on the trail. It doesn't mean anything. And the flip side of it is to stretch the metaphor is, no, the dropping of this scale here tells me that the dragon's just up the trail and that his lair may be there. And there are, you know, that there is all of the evil is tied to it. It's all connected. And so if you decide to let things be, you capitulate to the process. The good guy's civility disables them from dealing with the darkness that's here.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I mean, you don't win a war against pure evil without conflict. And I'm glad that it's a war of words. I'm glad that all I have to do is make a video where I point out how they're lying, usually with their own words, rather than have to go to war and maybe not come home. That's how it used to happen. You know, we really are living in a fortunate and interesting time, and so little is asked of us to push back against evil.
Well, part of that, in speaking as someone who was, let me be really clear, was not a Vietnam vet, but was a Vietnam era adult. Part of that is they realized when they got about into the 2/3 of the way into LBJ's term, and they realized that having a draft and pulling 30% of the eligible males from a certain age group into something allowed those males, and of course now it would include females perhaps, but allowed those people to see what was really going on. By the time the Vietnam thing ended, we had vets that came back and that would watch the news and say, you know, the geography isn't what they say it is. The death count is not what they say it is. The challenges are not what they say it is. No, we cannot hold territory, and on and on and on. And so part of the goodness is that you and I are not at risk. The bad part is that we have people that are condemned to silence, and they're the only ones that are on the front lines.
You know, there is something to be said for real suffering and real world experience like that is incredible. And, you know, it seems like the military in general has a pretty high percentage of people being, you know, red pilled or woke or whatever you want to say. And I guess that's always been the case. But, you know, a nation of sheep begets a government of wolves. And we've been too complacent. We've been too turn the other cheek. We've been too passive and accepting. And we have forgotten that, you know, justice is partly of the sword, and you know, we have to push back, and that means conflict, even if it's verbal conflict, even if it's, you know, arguments at the dinner table, even if it's scolding someone for doing something wrong rather than just letting them live their life and you know, continue in bad immoral behavior. Because I think that's what the whole where we go one we go all thing really means. It's like we're all connected. This stuff, it all affects everyone. If you piss in the pool, we're going to have to swim in it.
Well, what John Adams said, apparently, and I read some stuff that one of the subscribers sent me, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me, but basically the Constitution that we put together, that is our founding fathers put together, was designed to be used by people who were moral and honorable and had a spiritual and moral underpinning. Mm-hmm. And and they did not write this for evil people. And on top of that, if the more power you give people, the more honorable they must be in order to hold the space. And basically what Adams ended up saying is, we cannot build a constitution that will protect you from people in power that are evil.
Yeah, it won't work. I mean, a republic, if you can keep it, and, as you were saying, it requires certain, foundations, morals, and values, but also a certain education level. And, I don't think we even have the minimum education level in this country on average to maintain a republic.
Well, when you ask people, and they used to do this with the comedy shows or the late night shows, and they'd go out on the street and say, can you tell me about the Constitution? They wouldn't know it exists. Can you tell me who your U.S. senator is? They couldn't answer who the vice president was. They didn't know what cabinet officers were. They had no idea who ambassadors were, where they had no sense of geography. But if you asked them about Kardashian or somebody like that, I don't know these people.
Yeah.
If you asked them who the Kardashians had just tossed out and who was having a baby and where they got their divorce, or who was playing football and who had knelt at the latest football game, boy, they had that stuff down cold.
Yeah. Yeah, it is scary, and even if we win this war, this battle, this generation, we still have a lot to do to save the world, save the nation, save people. There's still a lot of damage to reverse. I've been really trying to push the health thing lately, and show people ways that are effective at detoxing, mercuries and just general health stuff. The high impact stuff that people can do themselves at home to take back their some of their health. Some of it's lost forever. Some of this stuff damages you forever, but some of it can be taken back. And I'm getting a lot of results there. A lot of people are sending me good stuff, and a lot of people are really grateful for that information because it's so expensive and it's such a confusing topic for people. But just to go off on a side tangent, but
no, I don't think that's a side tangent at all. I mean, when you look at the whole survival issue, which was brought up by Q today, and again, people will beat up on you and me because it's a LARP and everything. But so what is wrong with pointing out that Trump said that this is Preparedness Month, National Preparedness Month? Well, it also includes how do you filter your water? How do you get fluorides out of your water? What are you going to do instead of using antibiotics? How do you clear the mercury and the rest of that out? How do you detox? What are you going to do that doesn't have glyphosate? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, glyphosate or glyphosate.
Yeah, glyphosate as a weed killer. And how do you avoid getting that into your food supply? If you're doing the GMOs, what are you doing? So, and the problem with it is, and I'll give you my own version of it, is that there is no central repository for this stuff. Nobody wants to put this up and centralize it so that reasonably intelligent people can read all about it, can do some pre-diagnostic kinds of things and follow through. And then let me give you my own personal thing, and I don't mean to kind of get on a soapbox, but I discovered 50 years ago, more than that I had severe allergies. And my allergies are mostly sinus and eyes, face, and some asthma. And in the process, I've had polyps removed from my head at least 5 or 6 times and have been under surgery at least 3 or 4 times. Had my nose straightened, had the turbinates removed or cut down in the back. And, I take pills all the time and it still is there. And so there is both how do I reduce and avoid problems. And for me, it means staying clear of everything that has perfume in it. The Glade air fresheners, scented candles, scented soap, hair gel, scented lotions, dishwashing detergent, the dryer sheets. It just goes on and on. but the other part of it is how do I stay healthy in the process, and what is it that I can do? And if I just to give an example that people would have more of a sense of, go to the store, go to Walmart or Safeway or one of these big ones, and look for fluoride-free toothpaste.
Good luck. Yeah, you may find some, but you know, you mentioned some of those airborne scents and cosmetics and perfumes, things like that. Those things are basically unregulated, and they haven't even done studies on, like, I think it was about 80% of the chemicals that they use in these things. It is, going back real fast before I forget it, for people that call this a LARP, still at this point, I've quit trying to convince people Q is real, because at this point it's kind of a litmus test for the ability to reason. But a good question that just you can ask them now is, how did Q know that Hillary was Alice? We just found out about this with the FOIA request, the declassified email that came out where Hillary is referred to as Alice, and then the other guy is referred to, Marty or whatever, is referred to as the Mad Hatter. And Q knew about this at the beginning, over a year before.
A year ago, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the central repository thing, I'm trying to do that. I think a big problem with it is that people who do that continually turn up suicided. And maybe it's different because I'm visible and I'm trying to stay as visible as I can to stay safe. But, I'm trying to teach people ways that they can take it back and share it with others. I'm not trying to send people to patented expensive things. I'm trying to teach them how to do their own liposomal vitamins or things like that. Which is usually very, very high impact, high value, very low cost kind of options.
The problem, and again, this ranges all the way from the holistic kinds of things that you typically talk about, and I've heard some of what you had to say, all the way to the street stuff. I find, for instance, that magnesium is a really important thing for me to add every day, and if I don't, I get muscle cramps.
Yeah.
And all right, so you go to the store, and even at the health food store, you say, well, which one of these is absorbable? Which one of them is going to last long enough? How is it going to fit through? And who's done a test? Magnesium, I think potassium and magnesium come in about 4 different.
With magnesium, it's like 8 different options. I think it's many different ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And so which ones work? And how do I know whether they're working or not? And how do they compare? Does it take twice as much of one kind as it does the other? Nobody says. Nobody says anything.
Yeah, you have to do your own. Yeah, I mean, these people don't know. They just bottle up cheap stuff and sell it to us.
And it isn't like it's rocket science to figure it out. I mean, you and I could set up a test. A minimal sampling would be 25 people. So if you took the 4 major forms of magnesium, had a minimum of 25 people in each sampling, you zeroed them for distribution, generational distribution and health and gender and the rest of that. You could run it through the computer, and if you did some multiple tests on the magnesium, even on results, you could hone in on it and have some kind of reasonable report, and it wouldn't cost $10 million to do it.
No, not at all. It's funny because anything that really works, they don't really let it get tested anyway. But most of this stuff, we don't even have to study because people have done the research. If you do the deep dive and you dig into this stuff, other than some of the cutting edge stuff that's just really recent and there's not, maybe it's just 1 or 2 scientists working on it and then they were suppressed and it's hard to get the data. Some of this stuff is pretty extensive and it's out there. Like when I was looking into magnesium, there were a lot of options. I settled on not even the best quality, but the best value one, which is, in my opinion, magnesium chloride USP, which it's not the most absorbable of all, but it's a high absorbable. It's very safe and it's so cheap, it's virtually free in a daily use. Whereas the highest, most absorbable is going to be kind of expensive and you barely get any more out of it. So it's not really a better value play. And
Yeah, exactly. And if somebody said to me, try this less expensive one. And if you cramp up in 3 days, then go buy the more expensive one. But try this first. You would have saved $20 a month by doing it that way.
Oh, yeah. And, I don't know what the bottles cost, but you look at a general retail bottle of some kind of supplement or whatever, $20, $30, $40, $50. What I generally do, like when I do magnesium, for example, I'll buy the bag of the powder, and then that's basically a year or two supply at least, which I can mix with water. So I don't even know what my daily cost is, but it's less than, 5 cents. So it's hugely different, hugely more impactful. And it's something that anyone can learn a basic recipe, just like if you can bake a cake, you can easily make most of your own DIY stuff.
The other thing about it, though, is if you were not going to get into algebra, which you have to do in some basic fashion, depending on your body weight and the rest of that, if there were an online source that said, if you're taking magnesium chloride, then you need so much a day,
Mm-hmm.
and or twice a day, and break it down. Here it is, and then factor in your weight, and you got it right. And and the other thing about it is, and it takes studying to do it. All right, so if I overdo it, do I cause problems? And what problems am I going to look for?
Mm-hmm.
So what does underdoing it and overdoing it look like?
And then on top of that, you also have to throw in like how damaged our systems are from what we've already been through. So then are you even getting the normal absorption rate, or are you having very little any at all because of your stomach and your internal intestines and such? So there is a degree of learning, and there is a degree of sort of experimenting with yourself and finding your sweet spot. And that's kind of how holistic medicine has always worked. But compare that to something, just flip on any television show and then look at any of the commercials. Most of them are drugs. And then of those, there are probably a dozen, different side effects that are worse than the disease. I mean, you don't get that, generally speaking, with things that you do holistic stuff. There are exceptions. There's things you can do that are dangerous, like detox mercury. That can be very dangerous if you do it wrong. But, the holistic stuff has always been people's go-to medicine. All of this allopathic medicine has been kind of a recent trend after penicillin was discovered. I mean, it's the same folks who also killed George Washington with leeches. So I like to remind people of that.
Well, the other thing that I'm sure you've studied and looked at is that a lot of this stuff, when the industrial age came and Rockefellers became billionaires 100 years ago, 120 years ago, they realized that pharmaceuticals could come out of chemicals, out of petroleum and other chemicals. And so they took over the medical facilities, they took over the teaching hospitals, they put up foundations, they set up trusts, they took over the pharmaceutical companies, they front-ended all of the standard FDA kinds of things. People tend to think that the FDA is there to protect us.
Mm-mm.
What they don't realize is that the FDA is there to keep small companies from competing with the big 3 or 4 or 5. If you put, a $200 million front load on a medication, and you can't get it tested, and it takes 10 or 15 years, and your patents run out before you get it lined out, the big guys can play that game. The little guys can't.
A great example I like to give people about the FDA is a guy in Texas named Dr. Brzezinski. This guy's been curing childhood brainstem glioma cancers, like the 100% fatal cancers. He's been curing them with a very high rate of success. Now he does it with a drug that he's patented, but there are other options out there in my opinion, but he's done this. They've tried to throw him in prison. The FDA has tried to hit him with dozens of felonies, and then it took a congressional hearing to get them to back down and actually approve him for clinical trials. He cannot get the funding to get his clinical trials approved, last I checked. And all of these big cancer charities, like Susan G. Komen for the Cure and, these others, they take in billions of dollars a year. Barely any of it, if anything, goes to any kind of research. And that research is for more drugs to make us more dependent, not to actually get rid of anything. So absolutely, it's a revolving door. They sell us out, and then they get cushy jobs at the big pharmaceutical companies a few years later, and it just keeps continuing.
Well, and you cannot self-fund either.
Yeah,
The Security and Exchange stuff is all set up so that if you don't have Security and Exchange attorneys, if you're not prepared to make a prospectus or a release, I can't remember all the terminology of it, that's 150 pages and then has all the caveats in it. If you're not prepared to, if you have to open yourself to the distribution of stock for that prospective drug, you can't do it online. You have to go through all of the rigmarole. And again, what it sets up is what I call mercantilism, and everybody else calls it mercantilism if they think about it too. But it's not free enterprise. It's not capitalism. It is the government protecting big business, and they do it. And you say, well, gee, how do they do this? Well, they do it. They think about it every day. They have lobbyists and financial people, MBAs, that sit there every day and say, if we could pass legislation that would squeeze these guys, our competition, off the plate, we could have a monopoly in this whole area. All we have to do is go tell the congressman that it's not safe for small companies to be doing this kind of research, and we squeeze them off the plate.
Of course. It is so rigged, and it seems like throughout history, 100% chance that if you give someone power, it will always be abused.
Well, when you go right back to it, you've got Thomas Jefferson, one of my heroes, who said we need a revolution every 25 years. And why did he say that? Well, because he'd been all over the place. One of the places that he had been, and I didn't read this until recently, was that he was in pre-revolution, pre-Bastille Day France. And what I had no idea about was that they had regulations in pre-Bastille France for everything. Everything had to be transported. Everything had to be licensed. Everything was centralized. All of the regulation was there. There were delays for everything. You couldn't imagine a rural economy operating with that level of centralized control. And he realized that, and this is part of his education for it, is that if you have a centralized government that takes over everything, you by definition destroy the capacity to adapt to different situations and problems.
Mm-hmm. I agree. No, he's the American lion for a reason. But absolutely, Dr. Frog, I have so much fun talking to you that I may lose track. I don't even know how long we've been going.
Yeah,
have we missed anything that's important? Is there anything else that you want to cover? Because I know people just won't watch it after a certain point.
Yeah, well, there are some that will and some that won't. And if they got the first 10 minutes, I'm thinking that we probably need to cut off that video time, splice that off. And I don't know whether you do that or not, but I can do it if I need to. And yeah, the other thing that I want to talk about briefly was really interesting. It's the last post by Q, and it has to do with the sensitive compartmented information facility and how these guys that went to these presidential former presidents, and I suppose boys like Kissinger, and you've got Graham, and what's the guy from Connecticut that he's out now, but
I don't know. I did see Kissinger at the McCain thing.
Yeah, so you've got a dozen of these people that apparently were in one of these skiffs, and they apparently arranged some kind of remote skiff for these people to all sit and hide and put a Secret Service detail in for a large perimeter to protect them from anybody from getting close enough to breach that skiff. Pretty amazing stuff, really, when you think about why is it that our former presidents and their companions need to be in a place where they can talk and nobody under even the tightest security could hear them.
Yeah. Well, because if you're following the Q narrative, and if you're not following the Q narrative, then you probably don't even know that they're meeting to begin with. So you probably don't even ask the question.
or that anything they could say would be a problem.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought that was very, very curious. Yeah, let's do this again. We'll see if we can get a little better video and get something up. And
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy having you on the show, and I guess being on your show as well, if we're going to both do it. But yeah, and you know, people have actually been asking me to get back with you and do some more collaboration, and I told them, like, yeah, I've been talking to him about it. I just time and being a new dad, and I will get there. But I'm so glad we got to chat tonight.
yeah, I think it is good to triangulate things, to look at it from different perspectives. You're one of the guys that I looked at, and I was going to suggest to you that I put some kind of a notation. When I first started to get to the place where I was going to do videos, you're one of the 2 or 3 guys that I looked at on a steady basis, because I thought you were early on one of the most dependable Q folks, and you didn't jump up and down and pound your fist. You actually looked at it from an objective, grounded perspective, and I respected that. So yeah, it's always good to connect, and I really appreciate what you're doing in the health field. So
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Frog. You humble and honor me, brother, and I really appreciate it. And let's do something again soon.
all right, sounds good. Thanks so much.